Welcome to the latest episode of the Table Rush Talk Show, where today we're diving into the intricate world of sales, technology, and productivity. I'm thrilled to introduce our guest, Joel Stevenson, a seasoned podcast host and an expert in scaling businesses. Joel's journey includes transforming Wayfarer's B2B business from its nascent stages to a staggering $400 million in annual revenue. Currently, he's the GM of direct brands at Vendasta, where he's reshaping the landscape of branding and communication. Join us as we unravel Joel's insights on effective sales strategies, the power of the right words at the right time, and much more. Welcome, everybody, to the Table Rush Talk Show. Today, I have with me Joel Stevenson, and Joel is all about sales and leveraging tech for productivity. And you've got a lot to share about leading, branding, and the importance of saying the right thing at the right time. Welcome, Joel.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I was recommended by you some podcast topic ideas, and one that jumped out to me is keys to avoiding lead loss due to inadequate follow-up.
Yeah.
Let's I don't see why we wouldn't just dive right in on that, and maybe we can weave in some Wayfair stories and then get to some of the fun things that you're up to. But so yeah, I'll let you start from there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it's a pretty important one. I feel sales has evolved over time, and if you think about sales at maybe at the highest level, you're trying to build up, you're trying to get more customers through the door, whatever it is that you do. If you work at a company, if you're a solopreneur, you're a CEO founder, that you have to be the only salesperson. You kind of have two choices. One choice is you can put more stuff in the top of the funnel, or your other choice is you can close the stuff that's in your funnel at a higher rate. That's really the only two ways you have to, to increase your new customer volume. You can maybe change pricing or other things to change your revenue yield, but fundamentally those are the two choices that you have. And for a while, and yes, we're in tools like it, I think have largely been used to increase top of the funnel. You think of the classic, like buy a list, spam the list. You get some people through, and maybe you drive some new business that way, or maybe you don't. Those tactics are becoming increasingly more difficult as more and more people do them, and as the volume of communications has only gone up. It's definitely not going down, and so it's tougher than ever to break in. Tools like the large language models are making it even easier to sort of generate very high volumes of communication that maybe look a little bit more authentic than they used to. So it's the volume game is getting tough for a number of reasons. And so what I feel like a lot, where for many people the place to start is to just do a better job with the leads that you have. And I sometimes think about this as a tennis analogy. So if you think about you're playing tennis against, I don't know, Serena Williams or something, and she blasts a serve at you and you hit it in the net, like that's a forced error, because you can't return one of her serves. You're a mere mortal. But if there's some easy lob that comes over the net and you smash it out of bounds, that's an unforced error, because like you should have been able to hit that into the court. And I think what happens a lot of times in selling is that we get busy, maybe we've got a bunch of different deals that are going, maybe there's other things that are going on, and we start to lose track of the very core fundamentals, which are, how do you prepare properly for a call? How do you, then execute that call effectively? How do you follow up effectively and timely? And it's easy to lose deals because you just didn't do some of those things. And it's like in some ways, you did the hardest part, which is you got a customer to the table and you were able to have a good conversation with them about what their business needs are and how you can help them. And then just through, lack of effort, organization, technology, whatever it is, you let that fall away. And these leads are precious, and you really don't want to lose due to unforced errors. And what happens when you lose things like that, your funnel yield isn't as good as it could have been. And now when you're trying to figure out how you're going to get new people into your funnel, whether you're going to produce content, you're going to pay for advertising, or you're going to get influencers, whatever it ends up being, all that stuff costs money. And at some point, you've got to have a reasonable payback on the amount of money that you're spending to bring new leads to you, or whatever that is. And your yield is going to determine how much you can spend on acquiring new leads. And so it ends up, there's a cycle here that ends up playing on itself. And if you have competitors and they're doing a better job than you, then they can probably afford to spend more, given, sometimes there's irrational economic actors, and we've seen a lot of that in the VC industry, or VC-backed funded companies, certainly. But in theory, your competitor is going to be able to spend more than you to acquire a new customer because they do a better job of it. So that's why I try to talk to people about, don't ever lose a deal because of follow-up. It's fine if you are, politely persistent, and eventually the customer says, well, it's not the right time for me, or your solution is the right, whatever. Like that's a fine way to lose, but it's not a great way to lose when you just got busy and you forgot about it, and then person decided you weren't important anymore. It's the old sales saying of time kills deals, is true.
Yeah, I love that. So what did you say? Don't ever lose a deal to inadequate follow-up. Is that what
Yeah.
I heard you say? Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I love that. The fortune is in the follow-up. That's sort of an old school
Yeah.
um saying that I might be a few years older than you, but that's what we were always told. The fortune is in the follow-up. And then I think I heard you say irrational economic vendors. Is that is that the word that you or is that the
I
term that
think
you use?
irrational, irrational economic actors. So they
Actors.
are not. They have some. They're, for some reason, they don't act as you would expect they would, either because they raise too much money and they've got to produce a growth number without regard to unit economics, or they're maybe just not numerate, or who knows why. They
I
were
love
they
it.
were drunk when they were bidding on Google ads. Yeah, you never know.
You never, you never know. Someone went rogue.
Yeah.
Yeah, what it's like in the randomly you'll hear about the Wall Street trader who loses $1 billion because they went rogue.
Mm.
Sort of one of those, but maybe with Google ads, right?
Yeah, Google and Facebook have no problem taking your money whatsoever.
Oh
You will
my
never get a call from
gosh.
Google saying, like, I think you might want to pull back a little bit on your advertising.
Yeah, that's actually one thing I love about podcasting, just to talk about that is it's a great way to build some organic traffic, to get some organic traction, some SEO stuff, all that kind of thing, all those kinds of things. And I think so many fledgling entrepreneurs unfortunately will start with Facebook ads, perhaps trying to dial in their messaging, and they're completely underfunded, so they end up spending all their money at what could be perceived as a losing game.
Mhm.
Right? Would you say that's an accurate statement or
Yeah, I mean, obviously those channels are all very competitive, and you're not just going to show up usually and be able to generate very good economics over time. You're going to have to figure out your targeting. You got to figure out your creative. All that stuff requires cycles, and really on Facebook, you're probably reacting to something that's a very basic message, right? Like, oh, like, funnel screwed up, like call yes or, so I don't think we run that, but something like that. We used to have a tag, we used to have this copy that worked well with us. It was like, wonder what happens, like what happens after you hit send. Because part of our solution gives you email open tracking. But you think about a podcast, and if somebody listens to a podcast, like the depth of information and knowledge that they're going to get, like when they show up in your funnel, not only do you get some of the benefits that you mentioned earlier, but if somebody shows up in your funnel after consuming long form content like that, my guess is they're probably going to be a much more qualified customer showing up than somebody that just kind of responsively, clicked an ad.
yeah. Tired of hearing no? Yes.
Yeah, right.
Um, and I want to circle back around on the tactics are becoming more and more difficult. The volume game is getting
Mm.
tough, and so I guess not I guess, your implication there, what you were implying there or inferring is that, hey, with Chat GPT, it's so easy for 7 months ago, somebody could have been very frustrated trying to spin up some marketing, some emails, some ads, some copy, and now they can do it with Chat GPT, or somebody is trying to decide what to put on their Facebook posts, and now they can
Hmm.
spin it up with
Yep.
Chat GPT. So it's just the flood of content coming at people. It's like a tsunami or a
Hmm.
tidal wave, I suppose. Yeah. Is that sort of what you're saying there?
Yeah, right.
Mhm.
And it, in the email tools are starting to put up, greater defenses against some of that too, which we can talk about. But yes, it used to be that, maybe, I don't know, call it 5 years ago or something, most people really didn't do that good of a job even making it seem like their email was personalized. It's like insert name here kind of thing. And so the reps that, were able to template some of their content, but made sure that they had space to write things that were sincere about a person, where it made the recipient seem like this person spent some time writing this to me. This wasn't just like a classic mail merge to 5,000 people or something. uh that was typically helpful, but the challenge now that there's plenty of tools out there. We have some versions of this where you can just kind of put in a LinkedIn profile and say, this is the kind of message I want to deliver to this person, and you will sound like you spent some time looking at it when you may or may not have. So that
Mm.
there are some time savings there. So I think the bar for what good personalization is and what people will start to filter out, just keeps going up as a result of that.
Mm, I love that. The bar for what good personalization is going up. I love that. That's a great soundbite right there. That is juicy and good. Thank you for that. So the email companies are putting up greater tools to defense that. So is that what I heard you say as well?
Yeah, the so Google and Yahoo have announced that they're changing some of their email deliverability standards. So if you're a company or an individual, I suppose, that sends more than 5,000 emails per day from your domain, what they're going to start to do is they're going to require you to, maintain certain, technical email header standards and authentication standards, which I think probably most people are already in compliance with. But then you also need to have one-click unsubscribe, so you can't kind of put people through, a series of questions or whatever to try to unsubscribe. Like, it has to be a legitimate one click. And I imagine they've developed, bots or ways of sort of testing that. And then after you do all those things, if you get more than, I think it's 0.3% of your messages marked as spam, then by users, then they're going to put you in jail, and hurt your deliverability. And I actually don't know how you get out of jail, or if it's a temporary period, or how any of that stuff works. But and I think Google has been doing many of these things sort of behind the scenes for a while, but now they've sort of come out and said, these are sort of the new rules of the game that you need to abide by.
Yeah. Um, how old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm 48.
48. Uh, a young looking 48, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, so you are not much younger than me. The older I get, the harder it is for me to tell how old people are. Um, so you I'm just catching quality, like you've got legit uh sales experience, right? And what am I saying here? How do I want to say this? Well, let me ask you this. So, what were your where does this core sales experience come from? I guess that's my question.
Yeah, it's somewhat, I don't know if it's maybe accidental is the way to refer to it. But when I was in my undergrad, I started as a finance major, um, and eventually there was a guy that I knew. I was sort of a long story, but I started in 1995 as an internship. I ended up selling websites to people in Chicago, and I kind of got a little bit bitten by the bug of tech and sales, and so I ended up switching to a more generic, marketing major, and then I ended up taking a sales job as my first job out of company, working for a telecom company. And the reason I chose it is because they had the 6 month, very elaborate, very professional sales training process, and I had heard somebody speak at some point during my undergrad that basically said, whatever you're doing, you're selling, and so that's a skill that's worth picking up when you're younger. So I thought, all right, fine, like I'll try it. I personally am not the greatest salesperson, I would say. I'm fine at it. I think I know, probably more of the theory and management and structure of it now than I do, like, I'm not Zig Ziglar or something like that. But I did it for a while, and then I got caught up in the dot-com boom, and then 9/11 happened, and so everything sort of fell apart. And then I ended up going back to get my MBA and to become more quantitative. So I did actually do a finance concentration there, and then I ended up working for a sales consultancy called ZS Associates, which is a very quantitative consulting firm. A lot of engineers. They work with big pharma and med tech, and we work with some other people, some other folks as well. And so at that point, I had worked in a bunch of different types of sales roles. I'd done it for a while, and so that was kind of my go-to base of knowledge. And so I showed up in different other roles over time, but I just sort of ended up kind of falling back on that strength, I suppose.
That's cool. And so were you like pre MBA, pre 9/11 when you're out there
Hmm.
in the field selling,
Yeah.
let's say, are you telemarketing? Are you going door to door? Are you going business to business? If you're selling telecom, there was probably some version of all of that, or
Yeah, it was a mix. I did my first job. I had a physical sales territory, and so I would, we did some stuff on the phone. We were a phone company, so that was allowed. But you were supposed to be going out in person to visit customers. In fact, the rule was you had to wear a suit if you were visiting customers. And so if you didn't have any customer visits, you could not wear a suit, but you could only get away with that so many days before people started asking questions about, like, why doesn't Joel show up in a suit anymore? So there was a good kind of forcing function there. But yeah, I used to have like the old, like the 60-page map book, because I had to figure out how to drive to all these places. That was before you had even MapQuest.
what was the
And
yeah, the guide, the something guide, the Thomas guide, I think it was called,
something,
or
well,
something.
yeah, it was one of
Anyway,
these things where it's like, oh,
yeah.
you got, oh, A5. Okay, then you got to go to, go to A5 and figure out where you were. It was, yeah, I mean, they worked, but it's certainly not quite as good as Google Maps. But
Yeah,
um,
printing MapQuest.
yeah,
Printing the
right.
MapQuest was high tech, right? I
Oh, yeah,
I
that
remember
was
those days
that was a
too.
revelation back then.
Okay,
Um,
go on.
so a lot of it was in person, and it was a territory model where, most of the customers were already using our services, and we were trying to sell them advanced data services or video conferencing or whatever. And so I was kind of, you could sort of think of me as an outside salesperson, then I had an inside salesperson, support person that was helping doing all the technical provisioning and ordering and all that type of stuff.
Well, so the MBA after 9/11, was that I don't know what to do with my life. I'm going to get an MBA, career and cratered, or were you more of like next logical step, or how does the MBA come about?
Yeah, I kind of hated school. And I graduated early just to sort of be done with it. In retrospect, that was deeply foolish. I mean, totally could have spent more time in my undergrad. I try to counsel my kids on that, but the the so I was part of the dot-com thing. I worked at this company called Ariba, and at one point, I remember this, we were valued more. Our market cap was more than every other airline combined at one point. There's just like these stupid things, and so then obviously that didn't last. And then I went and took another job at a different company selling. We were selling these kind of. It was a tool to help big companies manage their private label operations, so international sourcing and branding and all that kind of stuff, item master type things. And that was a big, long selling process, like 18-month kind of payback type of thing, like huge professional services, all that type of stuff. And now I was doing that before 9/11 happened. And then when 9/11 happened, it was like, everybody's just sort of shut everything off. And, 18-month payback type solutions were not really a thing that people wanted to talk about. So that company ended up laying off our entire division. And yeah, wasn't sure what I was going to do for a while. It wasn't really clear that I was going to be able to get another equivalent job at similar income levels. And it was really my wife that convinced me to get my MBA because her family had more. I was first generation college in my family, but her family had more advanced degrees. And she's like, well, you should get your MBA. And so I was like, all right, I guess. And so I kind of sort of put it to the last minute. And I remember like having to, rush down to the post office to get my things in, before the very end of the third, deadline and all that stuff. So I wouldn't say it was really premeditated. It ended up working out. And then I think as I got in there, I recognized that as an opportunity to reinvent myself somewhat, which I think MBAs are. I don't, MBAs are great. I really enjoyed my time there. That was a really awesome 2 years. But I'm not necessarily for or against MBAs in general. I think it depends on the person and the situation. But one of the good situations for it, I think, is when you're sort of maybe typecast as a certain thing and you want to, kind of go back into central casting and reinvent yourself. I think they're really good for that.
Dude, that's a great analogy. Oh my gosh. So you're in long sales cycle selling, and my guess is the telecom stuff or the telco stuff you were doing originally was not so long sales cycle, and then you fall into this long sales cycle stuff.
Mhm.
Did you like one or the other, or were you better at one or the other, or bad at both, or
Um, the challenge I had with the second opportunity, which was the much longer sales cycles, was there wasn't really much in the way of pipeline uh that showed up. Like you really had to develop all your own pipeline. And at that point in my life, I was not disciplined enough to put in the consistent work on the prospecting side. And I think I probably didn't handle rejection as well as I should have. And I was working out of my house. That was before we had all the current tech. That was a little bit, I found that to be a little bit lonely and isolating. It was just kind of the wrong time for me to have that job, I think. So, I think to the extent that I got into like real sales processes, I could handle them fine. It was really more, but that full cycle aspect of it, I just did not do a good enough job on the front end versus on the original territory model. There was a lot of stuff that was sort of constantly coming up, and you did have to prospect, and you had to fish for opportunities and all those things, and try to go talk to accounts that you hadn't talked to in a long time. But the demands for you eat what you kill was much greater on this other side, and I didn't do particularly well with that.
yeah, yeah. You literally were creating a sales territory, nurturing it, growing it from the ground up versus some of the telco stuff or phone company stuff. There's already a basic need there, or so you're maybe snatching somebody from somebody else, or or just like you said, look, I worked in the telecom industry for a little bit through the dot-com boom too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I literally was like on paper, stock options worth all this money,
Hmm.
salary, overnight, company was
Yeah, I remember that.
bankrupt. Yeah. And then it was like, oh, worthless stock options, stuff like that. So I went through
Hmm.
all that fun stuff too. But I guess so you get your MBA and you said some interesting things. Um, like you're throwing out a lot of technical terms, which I love, which is either good or bad, but it's a little different than like Zig Ziglar talk, right?
Hmm.
Which is
Yep.
more of your old school, pick up the phones, door to door, whatever. So
Yeah.
you get your MBA, you go to more of this quantitative model, I think
Hmm.
is what you called it. And so is that another way of saying, okay, how do we leverage the internet or the tech that's out there to do the selling for us, or creating online funnels, or does that question make sense a
Yeah,
little bit?
that actually came more a little bit later in my Wayfarer experience. The ZS experience was what they were actually known for, was it was started by a couple of Northwestern professors, and the thing that they originally did was they built a computer program that solved this traveling salesman optimization, which is like, which door should you go to, like which person should you go see to maximize your or optimize your time, because pharma reps in those days were just going, doctor to doctor to doctor. So they had a thing that helped them figure out, like, what pattern to go in. And then eventually what they became better known for was of optimizing the size and structure of sales forces. And so if you've ever heard a doctor complain about like there's way too many pharma reps, it's effectively because they proved with math that more reps were better uh, in most cases. And so they took a very detailed analytical bottoms up view to how many reps should you have, where should they be, what should they be focused on. And so that really changed the industry in many ways. And so, even today, like most of their customer base is big pharma and med tech and that type of stuff. So that was interesting. So that was really kind of taking not so much of the individual salesperson and how are you going to do a better job of selling this thing, but how do you structure a team in such a way that you're likely to generate the best results?
That's cool. And so the answer was a lot of salespeople and make them real cute.
Yeah, I don't think that was in the model originally, but somehow the pharma people, I guess, just figured that out on
They
their own.
just they figured that tweak on their own. Yes.
Yeah.
Um, so what was that company again? That you
ZS Associates.
ZS Associates. So ZS Associates, and what do you like or not like about what you're doing there, or what are you doing there? What were you tasked with doing? Because now you've got your MBA, and
Mhm.
so you're at this ZS Associates that's uh telling people how to what door they should go to next, which I love,
Yeah.
making that more efficient. But go ahead.
Yeah, we had I enjoyed it. I mean, the work I found to be pretty interesting, and you could make a real difference for folks. So I remember we did a big project with FedEx Kinko's to try to help them understand in a particular region of the country that was underperforming, like why that might be the case. And so we were able to pull in a lot of external data, and we eventually found that they were spending their time with the wrong types of customers, and they should reallocate their time to a different type of customer base. And I think that went pretty well for them after they implemented some of those changes. So it was neat. It was a chance to sort of still be with the folks that I was comfortable with and the business functions I was comfortable with, but mostly live your life in Excel and PowerPoint at that stage, especially Excel at that stage. That was fun.
Cool. So you go from more of like the sales face to face or whatever, the selling, traditional selling to now you've got your MBA and you're neck deep in Excel spreadsheets and you like that more than the sales side of things, or does that make
Yeah,
sense? Like I'm just trying to
yeah,
get a sense of like this shift of like turns out I'm just a spreadsheet nerd. Like what was I
yeah,
doing? Yeah.
yeah, right. Like if we were to if you were to ask me like, well, would you rather go on a sales call with somebody or write some really gnarly array formula in Excel? Like I'd probably take the array formula at this point. I like them both, but and I think a little bit is sort of penance for um, I was just too lazy when I was younger to get an engineering degree. Like I went to University of Illinois, which had an excellent engineering program, and a lot of my friends were engineers, and like I would have failed out. I was a wait, they worked so much harder than I did. And I don't think I could. I don't think I could have done it back then. But I regret that I put myself in that position. I think I should have gotten an undergrad engineering degree. And so I tend to take a little bit more of that approach, and it's sort of a blend of everything. I mean, I like the people side. I've generally gotten by having good verbal skills, but as I've gotten a little bit more advanced in my career, I've been able to add the quantitative side of it, and that's almost become the thing I lean on more so than the people skills now.
Dumb this down for me as much as you can. Okay. So tell me what is an array in Excel? right? So
Oh, okay.
for
Yeah.
everybody, yeah, hold on,
Yeah.
everybody listening, we know Excel spreadsheet or Google Sheets, right? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, an array formula is when you have a formula that manages a bunch of cells at the same time, so it handles a range of cells versus an individual cell. So, a simple one would be one called transpose, which is like you take a bunch of cells that are in a row and then you put them into a column, and there's a certain formatting and syntax where it's like then when you change one cell over here, it changes over here. So
Okay.
there's other ones. Offsets is what is a favorite of mine. But yeah, there's I think there's that woman on TikTok or whatever that has the
Yeah,
Excel training.
Miss
Yeah.
Excel or
Yeah, I
whatever.
think she's made quite a nice business off of that. You can go listen to her probably to figure it out.
Well, I was gonna say maybe, yeah, I love that. More of I was thinking along the lines of like this is what this is going to do for a salesperson, right? Like me making this Excel array is going to allow you as a salesperson to, I don't know, maybe you could bridge that gap, or we should just move
Um,
on.
no, I think salespeople generally should not get into array formulas. I think if that's where you're headed, you should think more about sales operations, or you could think more about certain sales management. I think, yeah, but generally speaking, I think that type of stuff is really more helpful for when you're trying to model things. And in general, I don't think salespeople should be modeling. They should be out selling, and they should be figuring out customer needs and that type of thing. Now, if you're on your own and you have to wear all the hats, then yeah, you maybe do have to do some modeling about like, well, what's the sales process look like, or how should this go, or like, what is this funnel going to have a good yield or a bad yield? There is some call for that, but I think
Cool.
the average salesperson, I think, I, I think it's a good life skill to be able to use tools like Excel effectively, but I don't think you should worry about it too much.
Yeah, no, no, I wasn't trying to educate on anybody on how to use arrays, but I was saying you just answered the question for me. It's like, hey, what I'm doing a high level with arrays is I'm modeling sales processes and things like that we can then bring to the sales force so you can be more effective. Is is that a good way to make
Yeah,
that bridge?
yeah, it's more, financial modeling, that type of thing. I mean, it's
There
a
we go.
sort of thing that, yeah, I mean, consultants and finance dorks and all that kind of stuff, like they eat that stuff up. But your average sales, I would say like 99% of all salespeople, if they never even understood what we were just talking about, it'd be totally cool.
We lost half the audience right now there. What are you guys even going on
Yeah,
about? Or they're hitting 30 seconds fast, 30 seconds,
yeah,
skip,
right,
skip, skip.
right.
Anyway, so are you so I guess let's just fast forward to Wayfair, where you helped grow $400 million from scratch to 400 million in annual revenue, and what do I want to ask about that? I guess were you like employee number six or employee number seven or something like that? Or
Not actually, not even close. I joined the company when it was csnstores.com, and csnstores.com was a group of individual microsites that were optimized for, SEO, SEM type of stuff. So we had things like, we had luggage.com and cookware.com, and we were heavily into furniture and lighting and all this stuff. We had one that people get a chuckle out of called allroosterdecor.com, which was just, what you'd expect, just rooster decor. So that if you typed in rooster decor into Google, we were the first thing that showed up, and you'd click on it and hopefully you'd buy something from us. So that's where the company started. And so I was probably I don't know, I was probably in the 200s, maybe even more than that. But the company at that point was, some logistics folks, but a lot of customer service people, kind of frontline employees. The business teams were still relatively small at that juncture. So I was able to join. I was there for 7 years, and then we eventually started this B2B division that I was heavily involved in getting off the ground in the early days. And I left it to go do some other things, and I came back to it later when it was about 100, and then we were able to grow it up to 400 before I left.
cool. And so you're at Wayfair, what are you doing over there? Are you are you working on the processes to make sure that leads are getting followed up on? Is that what's going on over there? Or tell me.
Well, the first job I had was I was overseeing a bunch of our individual websites. There's about 30 of them that I was overseeing with a team that had to do mostly with home improvement and renovation. And the way the B2B thing got started originally was, well, they had a run at it before, and they maybe gave up on it a little bit too early. But you would see if you'd look through the people that were buying from us, you would see these patterns emerge, like, oh, this electrician keeps buying from us, or oh, we're selling to a lot of interior designers or whatever. And so the experiment, because I had sales in my background, I thought, well, why don't we just call these people and give them a rep and say, don't use the website, call the rep, and we'll give you better service and we'll give you better pricing. Like, we're really going to take care of you. And so the initial thing, it was really actually an unsanctioned type of side project that we started with, and we just cold called people, and we eventually got folks to sort of get interested in it. Took some real work. We eventually hired somebody that had understood that model a little bit better as a salesperson, and she started all of a sudden to make a bunch of things happen, and so we eventually got it off the ground. But in the early days, it was really just trying to figure out how the whole thing was put together and working.
That's cool. Um, and I guess what I'm really trying to do is I mean, hopefully, ultimately, uh, is say, okay, as solopreneurs or small business owners, and that could be 1 to 50, right?
Hmm.
Employees, or people, uh, fledgling entrepreneurs. We've got plenty of corporate people that are burned out and they're like, I'm done being
Hmm.
living the corporate grind. So I think I'm going to be a consultant or write a book or do all these
Yeah.
kinds of things, right? You, I think, might be experiencing some of that yourself.
Yeah.
Um, but for those kind of people, like I've had to reinvent myself a number of times, and so as a solopreneur or a fledgling entrepreneur or somebody who's reinventing themselves coming into the info products or things like that,
Hmm.
um, it's really easy to feel like, man, I'm we can get lost in all the tech, right?
Hmm. Yep.
And it can absolutely feel like we're falling behind, right? And then I've got you on here right now who my guess is you've managed some fairly large budgets.
Hmm.
Yeah. And got to really like move millions of dollars of Facebook ads around, right? Ad dollar budgeting and things like that. And so I'm like, all right, man, I've got this you, Joel on the line here and like what can and then you talk about as a topic, it's like, yeah, follow up, man, follow up, follow up, follow up. So how do you bridge that gap of like or give us confidence to say, you know what, yeah, there's all this tech out there, but like just don't get lost in it? Or does this line of thinking making sense to you at all? Or
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the neat things about Wayfarer that I often tell people is that we often had people that were very junior that were managing these big Facebook budgets and Google budgets and things, and people were like, well, like, how could a 24-year-old do that? Well, number one, they were we had really smart people doing it, but number two was that we had invested in a data infrastructure at Wayfair that made it very easy for people to figure out what was going on. And so you didn't necessarily have to micromanage people, because if you wanted to see, not only what the inputs were, but what the outputs were, like, you could figure it out, that the data was there, and it was, with a little bit of work and elbow grease, you could figure out how to get it. And so yes, there was some real tech behind that, and there were some people that had to work to build those things. But that was also, I started there in 2009, and the world has advanced like very significantly since then, and it's a lot easier to build a kind of information infrastructure that you need at your company to figure out what's going on. And it doesn't necessarily have to be elaborate, especially in the early days, but you generally want to know, um, how much money am I spending on a thing? How many leads is it producing? What happens to those leads as they go through? And then how much money spits out at the end? And then, can I tie that back to the original lead? And there's all kinds of things, it's all kinds of rabbit holes you can fall into in traps and areas where it's difficult. You never really get a perfect picture, but you can get a mostly correct picture. You want to be, especially in the early days, you want to be just directionally correct because you can't just run the same thing and expect it to keep working or to keep working better. You always have to test and change and iterate. And so it's very difficult to test and iterate if you don't have the basic information that you need to figure out whether the thing you did was a good thing or a bad thing. And so what ends up happening a lot on the sales side and the marketing side, and we observe this at Wayfarer. I mean, it happens everywhere. It's happened at Yesware, where you sometimes split these responsibilities between sales and marketing, where you have marketing that's kind of responsible for delivering the leads, and you have sales that's responsible for taking those leads and selling them. And oftentimes that handoff point becomes murky where the marketing team says, oh, well, we do a lot better. We'd close more of these leads if the sales team didn't suck. And the sales team sits there and says, oh, well, we could, if we didn't keep getting crappy leads from the marketing team, that's terrible. Like we would do better. And so there's that handshake point. It's hard to get it right if there isn't a real understanding where marketing says, okay, sales is really trying. They're not dropping the ball. This gets back to the follow-up. He's like, we understand that they're following up. They are working these leads. Like we don't have questions that they're not working them. Either effort isn't there or execution. Like they're doing it. And then on the sales side, it's the handshake back to the marketing team that says marketing understands the leads that are closing and the leads that are doing well, and they're bringing us more of those good leads, and they're bringing us less of the leads that are bad. And if you can just establish that, it sounds way easier than it actually is to do in practice. But if you can just establish that one thing, that's a big part of the puzzle, I think, as you're trying to go from very small team into bigger team. It's like starting to unlock some of these things as often as some of the things that can get you there.
Cool. Hence Excel arrays. That's where we bring in the Excel arrays, bridge the gap
Yeah,
between
right. That's right. That's
between
right.
sales and marketing. So, how much follow-up was required at Wayfair? I mean, this is a very general
Hmm.
question, and I know you had I mean, you can buy some higher or some mid-ticket things as far as furniture. I'm looking at a fridge over there that I bought off of Wayfair, right? Like you can
Yeah.
buy all kinds of things, but yeah, like I think a lot of us have the illusion that Wayfair just runs an ad and people buy and it's all good. And they probably lose track of the fact that no, there's a lot of following up going on and perhaps even phone follow up or
Yeah, well, on the business side, so what we were mostly selling to interior designers and contractors, builders, that sort of thing. And our objective with them was that we wanted to do such a good job with service that they would just keep buying from us and they wouldn't buy from somebody else. I mean, service was really the number one thing that we were selling because, if you consider something like an interior designer, the way a lot of interior design used to get done, and it is still done to some extent this way today, is designer might walk a customer into a showroom and they look at some stuff and they might say, all right, we're going to buy this thing. And then the designer's secretly making 50% more, or they're getting like a 50% kickback on that thing that they just sold the customer. They don't know about it. And then you walk in at 5 other showrooms, 6 other showrooms. Eventually you have all the things that you need. And now the designer has to somehow make sure that all that stuff shows up on time. It isn't messed up and isn't screwed up. And those, there's a funny thing in home goods where the higher end the product is, the less likely the company is to have a single IT person. And so generally they're not that operationally sound. They're more artists, and they're working in the aesthetic arts more than the sort of the operations arts, if you will. So what ended up happening is a designer would kind of get stuck and they'd be like, oh, this thing that was supposed to show up isn't showing up. And we're supposed to be done and stage it and take pictures and have the client move in. And so like, I need something right away. And so they ended up on the Wayfair site because we had a lot of things that were positioned around the country that could get to the end consumer very quickly. And so they would order from us, and then we might figure out that they're a designer, and then we sort of try to convince them that we could deliver a better experience than that other model could. And so at that point, it's really incumbent on us to make sure that we actually deliver that experience. And so yeah, there's a lot of follow up associated with that. Follow up with a customer to make sure that we understand what's going on, follow up with the suppliers to make sure that they're actually delivering. Some of this stuff was automated, but it always goes wrong. And in some ways, the salespeople were there to do the things that the Wayfarer system wasn't natively good at. So let's say a contractor shows up and says, I'm doing a hotel and I got to order 100 sinks. The Wayfarer system isn't really that good at that because probably the contractor wants a discount. It's the supplier probably has to deliver in a different way. Like there's all these things that happen that are unusual. And so we basically shoved humans in the loop to try to allow us to deliver things that the website itself wasn't sort of set up to do. And so then that was all follow up, and it wasn't so much about, maybe the traditional sales type of follow up of like, hey, like we haven't talked, like, let's get together and meet. It was a little bit more of, a little bit of that on the customer side, but actually a lot of it on the back end side with suppliers. And they're basically selling to the suppliers to say, hey, like you got to deliver this thing for me, otherwise that's going to be, and the suppliers got a lot of other priorities. So it was a little bit of a different type of selling in that sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. And if I'm hearing you correctly, it's like the maybe the contractor's like, well, we'll buy 100, but if I could just get through to somebody to get some questions answered, I'd buy the 100 sinks. And so they
Right.
get the salesperson on the line and they're like, yeah, we can get him here on such and such day and ensure that that's going to happen. Or the supplier's like, or I need them delivered like this. So the supplier, yes, we'll wrap them in double wrap, bubble wrap, or whatever it is, right? Like just
Right.
massaging the system a little bit. If I'm hearing you correctly, a lot of that going on. Yeah.
Yeah, and it'd be very difficult to get those answers probably in a first call. So it's probably, you then have to go back and do some research and figure some things out and then get back to the customer and so that like that whole process is a bit of a trust building process where it's like, well, did you listen to me? Did you do the things that I asked you to do? And then when you showed up on the call with me, did you explain what I expected you to explain? And oftentimes if we could do that, if we had any kind of solution that, we were successful more so than we weren't.
Yeah, and being timely, right, with your responses
Mhm.
and following through with when you're going to say you're going to, and just what we would assume to be standard business selling practices, right, that a lot of
Yeah.
us can get lost in. Like as far as following up and keys to avoiding loss due to inadequate follow up. What was it? Keys to avoiding lead loss due to inadequate follow up. Like, thinking of the smaller solopreneur, like top three tips or, to make sure that that person is, we're maximizing our follow up or top
Hmm.
system or go ahead.
Yeah, we've done. I mean, some of this data may have changed over time, but we see about 1 billion emails a year at Yesware, and so we've done a lot of analytics about the way email works. And one of the interesting things is that if you don't get a reply within roughly the first hour, your odds of getting a reply that day are about 1 in 5. And if you don't get a reply within the first 24 hours, your odds of getting a reply drop down to 1 in 20 very quickly. And so what we find is that often what can often happen is that people give up too early. So it's not that necessarily the person doesn't want to get back, but that they might be drowning in issues or inbox, or just like you have a lot of people you're trying to sell to, they may have a lot of people that they're trying to sell to too for their business, or who knows what they're, what's going on in their lives. And so we find that typically the optimal follow-up routine is somewhere between 6 and 7 touches over 14 days, if you're not hearing from somebody. And so it might just be email, you might do a phone call, you might try to, contact somebody on LinkedIn. Normally, if you have their cell phone number, you can text them. It's normally good to have a multimodal approach to these things, but probably the simplest thing that most people could do is just make sure that they're following up with appropriate volume and frequency before, and ideally when you're doing it, you're also just not like, it's the old just checking in email that is a bane of my existence and many others. Like you do want to try to deliver value every time. Um,
Yes.
And that that can be a little bit tricky depending on how often you're trying to get in touch with somebody.
Yeah.
But hopefully you've got some ways to do that so that when you show up in somebody's inbox, they're not automatically pissed off about it. And there's sometimes where it's like it's not a good use of your time to keep following up with somebody because either they're not ready or they're wasting your time or they're not going to be a good fit prospect. And so, there's definitely the old, you fire your customers kind of thing. But the same thing applies to sales. Like if you spent all your time with the customers that were most likely to buy from you and you sort of cut off early the ones that are just, or put them into hey, is it okay if I follow up with you in 3 months? Like you're not ready right now. Like that for a lot of people is another optimization that can be good. So then you're not wasting your time following up with the people that aren't ready. You're concentrating your time on the folks that could actually buy.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, love that. So if I heard you correctly, it's if I engage or I cold outreach somebody or outreach to somebody, if I don't hear from them within the first hour, the odds go down dramatically that I'm going to hear from them at all. If I
Hmm.
don't hear from them in the first day, it goes down even more dramatically. That's kind
Hmm.
of what you were saying, right? And so you're saying, hey, ways to combat that are don't give up, but follow up with those, right? Follow up
Hmm.
with those, and then you can increase those positive responses or turn a non-response into a response from people that you haven't heard from. Is that in effect?
Yeah,
So what
right.
you're
Yeah, I
saying?
think
Yeah.
that the simple rubric is like if you didn't hear from somebody within 24 hours, assume that you're never going to hear from them again if you don't
Oh,
do something.
okay.
And so you could just reply to your original email saying like, hey, I didn't hear from you.
Love it.
That might work. But a better thing would probably be something along the lines of, hey, I know you're probably busy. We haven't had a chance to connect on this. I also wanted to send you this, you know, industry information or this report or this white paper or whatever, because I think it's relevant to your situation. And so, would love to discuss this with you and the, whatever else you talked about, the first time, when you get an opportunity. So you'd sort of do that enough times, and there's two things that happen. One is you end up being top of mind. Two is you end up, I think, being viewed as a little bit different than the average person that doesn't try to do that hard. And then also the reciprocity, sort of quotient that exists somewhere deep within all of us is a behavioral notion. As it's like, oh, you keep giving me these things, and I keep not giving you anything back. Like I start to feel guilty about the fact that I'm not even giving you the sort of the courtesy of a reply. So
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. How about this? I'm just trying to add value by reaching out to you again.
yeah, you could try it.
Yeah,
Might work. You
why
never
not?
know.
You never know. Test and try, right? So many of us are afraid to test and try.
Mhm.
And I think testing and trying is so important. And so, hey, I'd be remiss if we didn't speak to the fact that you have a podcast out there called The
Mhm.
Hard Sell with Joel Stevenson. Um, and just taking a cursory look at it, you talk all things sales with fellow entrepreneurs, CEOs, and sales experts. What message are you bringing with that, or is that a passion project or for you? Or tell me a bit about your podcast there.
Yeah, it's the most of the Yesware customer base are salespeople. We have a lot of technology companies that use us. We have other people that their title isn't salesperson, but they might be in a sales orientation, like an entrepreneur or a recruiter or something like that. So, what we're really trying to do with the show is give a little bit of inside baseball to folks about how different people are thinking about the state of the sales art. So whether it's, I've got a bunch of, CEO friends that I bring on the show to talk about whatever tech they're kind of working on, or we've had bankers on the show, we've had, sales trainers and other, operations types of experts. So we just try to get people on and talk about the stuff that they're interested in, they're good at, and then hopefully people, glean something from that that's useful in, either in their sales organization or their process.
Cool, amazing. And then usually I might be a little more directed with somebody, on an interview, talking about more of what you're up to, what you're doing, where can we guide people, how can you help them, things like
Hmm.
that. But at the before we jumped online here, you were saying you're in transition with a bunch of stuff. So I haven't really been like, you know, pushing somebody towards this is your expertise. This is where they can take advantage of what Joel has to offer. But maybe tell us, what are you up to or what's your grand vision or if
Yeah.
you're in some transition. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, so we sold the company about a year ago, and it's pretty common for CEOs of acquired companies to not stay forever, because you get a little bit of wanderlust, and yeah, it gets it gets hard to work for other people maybe. But I've got a few things that I'm interested to pursue on my own. Because I was a Wayfarer for so long, I did have start a small thing where we sell a little bit of furniture on Wayfair, and I've never really spent much time on it. And I want to spend a little bit more time on that. And then I'm going to try to incubate something a little bit different in the health insurance space. It doesn't have anything to do with tech necessarily, but is something I'm interested in. And then I'm going to try to write a book in the next year on intrapreneurship. So like how do you start new things inside of existing companies? So for to that person that, is kind of like me where my family situation was maybe such that it wasn't an ideal time for me to take a lot of risk, but I had that entrepreneurial interest and drive. And so how can you apply that within, an existing company if you're not ready to actually strike out on your own?
I love that. What a great concept. So what are some of your ideas or frameworks in that regard? It's super quick, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure you could go as deep as we wanted, but go ahead.
Well, there's the rough outline, I think actually looks a lot like a venture-backed company and like how you would see a venture-backed, at least, software company, which I'm familiar with, start, which is you kind of start where, you don't really have product market fit. You just have this idea and you just have to do a bunch of things that don't scale to try to figure out that there's a there and that there's something kind of interesting. And so you just beg, borrow, and steal and, kind of brute force your way to something that looks interesting. And then, when you've got something that looks interesting, then, you've got to kind of go figure out how to get some resources for this thing to get it to grow a little bit more. And then you got to build a business case, and you got to convince people it's a good idea, and then got to go explain why this could be, meaningful for for the investors if you're your own company, but for the company, for the company itself if you're doing that. So then you get like your first check and you start to grow and you start to scale, and then it's like, okay, well, now this is a real thing, and now you're ready to maybe talk to a growth investor, which is much more focused on what the core metrics are, how big the market is, how big what are the processes and systems that you have in place to ensure that when I write this $50 million check, it's not going to get evaporated. I mean, they still do plenty of times, but they try to do their diligence to avoid that. And then inside the company, that's a point where like you've really got to have your story together, and now you're going to start taking meaningful resources potentially away from something else towards this thing that you're trying to grow. And eventually you get it to a point where hopefully you do that and you are a meaningful part of the company's organization and revenue. And so now you're doing the things that a big venture-backed CEO would do. You're building a senior executive team. You're driving strategy. You've got a 3-year vision for what you're trying to do. You've got a bunch of people that you're trying to lead and manage through and improve. So that it ends up looking pretty similar, I think. It's just a different context.
I mean, I imagine some of it at the very beginning of that process is just getting company buy off that perhaps your time, energy, your own personal resources are going towards this other stuff than maybe what they're hoping your team or executive team or the owner is hoping that you'll be spending your time. Yes.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. There's some risk involved in it, because just like most new companies fail, I think most probably things that are tried within companies like new, markets or new divisions or new products, they also fail. And so, yeah, you've got to be willing you got to figure out a way to overcome that resistance. And then importantly, you have to work in a company where it's okay to fail, where
Mhm.
if you did that thing and you failed, you're not ostracized, that, you're judged for the way that you thought about the problem and the way that you executed against that problem, and whether it worked or whether it didn't, is secondary to how you approached it.
So, do you see this project or your vision of this book being more towards the company itself on how they can create this culture so it happens from within, or is it more, yeah,
I
versus, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I'm writing it almost more for my younger self. So I think it would be for the mostly for the person that wants to do this for their company, but I think there'll definitely be at least a chapter that talks about if you want to create these conditions inside of your company, here are some things that you should think about and try to go do.
I love it. So, but generally speaking, it's going to be more for the younger you who's like uh in this position in a company, growing a family, perhaps can't go take the big risk, and so they're like,
Hmm.
"Hey, how can I spread my entrepreneurial wings within this corporate environment or this business environment structure that I'm already in?" Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I love that. What a great idea. What's these days as you're transitioning out of I want to make sure I get the name of the company right, ZS Associates and such.
The Vendasta is the current one, which
Vendasta.
yeah,
Yeah, cool. What's
Canadian company, so there's different ways to say it.
okay. A side note, I was just interviewed someone earlier today who was Canadian and super successful, and I think it's pretty interesting. I'm American,
Hmm.
or what I'm not even sure if I'm allowed to say it that way anymore, but whatever. There's my ignorance shining through. That there's a lot of successful Canadian entrepreneurs and even in Hollywood, right? And it almost seems like disproportionate to the ratio, right? Like it's like 10 to 1 American to Canadian, perhaps, but the actual success metric is there's like more successful, it's more than 10 to 1 successful Canadian than not. Am I saying that right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's the cold weather, breeds resilience or something.
Right? They are not going to the beach, man.
Yeah,
They're trying to hide from the rain, hide from
that's
the
right.
rain and the cold and the snow. Can't watch another darn hockey game. And then I got one more question for you, and then we'll get back to the day. So what's your favorite thing to talk about right now? It's like it sounds like you're transitioning out of this much more structured environment to now it's like, oh, I get to write a book or do pet projects or whatever. What's the thing that just lights you up the most?
Yeah, I think right now it's a lot of this. There are so many things that are changing at the moment right now, and the AI is kind of upsetting the apple cart in so many places that it's kind of fun to speculate on what might happen, and how it's going to change certain things. I'm not smart enough to actually know what is going to happen. I mean, actually, part of the reason why I feel like it's a good time to exit software and get into different types of businesses is because I think AI is going to create like dramatic winners and losers in this. I don't think there's going to be that many winners, and it's difficult to figure out who that is going to be versus not. And so I'm kind of taking the position of, well, I'd rather be sitting here saying like I don't actually care who wins. I'm just going to use whatever the best tool is versus where I currently sit, which is like we're trying to build the best tool. And so we'll see what happens, but it's a fascinating time.
Yeah, very fascinating time. Wow. And so as far as so any software players out there that are on the precipice of destruction thanks to AI, um, like what industries or jobs or things do you see as more insulated from that? Because you hinted that like, oh, there's better places to be hanging out.
Yeah. Well, it's probably more the traditional industries. I mean, I think if you were to look at the remaining manufacturing base in America, many of those companies that aren't, kind of the massive public ones, but many of those small businesses are run by maybe it's the person that started them, or maybe it's a second or third generation. But in general, the people running those businesses are older at this point, and they can't run them forever. I think many of them have not really innovated that much. But it's like, well, who wakes up in the morning and dreams of starting a ball bearing company? Like you're probably, like would you want to start as like, oh, I'm going to start the next SaaS, or I'm going to build the next app for whatever. Like no one wakes up and says like, oh, ball bearings, and we're a ways away
Cardboard
from it.
boxes.
Fletch or whatever it was, they were talking about ball bearings. But But yeah, but whatever it is, but there's all these businesses that that you might consider dumb or boring or whatever, traditional, that are not, haven't been innovated in. And I think that for the very interesting opportunity, especially, is the waves of we're sort of going back from the everything needs to be outsourced to the lowest cost producer overseas to now, a lot of incentives to try to bring things back here to America. I think there's a lot of opportunity to take the best thinking in tech or, operations or consulting or whatever, and apply it to some of these businesses or industries that haven't had a real focus in that. I mean, to me, that's a big opportunity.
I love that. That's great insight. Thank you for that. Awesome. So we're hitting the 1 hour mark. So I want to be cognizant of your time, my time. I'm Pacific Coast. You're East Coast. So dinner is probably right around the corner. You've got kids of some sort. Yes, is that what I heard you say? How old are
Yeah.
they?
I've got 4 teenagers, so the youngest is 15, the oldest is 19.
Okay, so they might be looking at you sideways if they're home at all for dinner. Mine are a little older and they like to go get their own food. But anything that we didn't cover or anything that you're like, oh, I wished I'd have said this or that you might be remiss if I hit stop.
No, I think we covered a pretty broad range of things. So
Cool.
yeah, it might be my stomach talking, but yeah, I can't really think of much else to say at this point.
Okay, good. Well, you weren't like, oh man, I wished everybody'd go check me out here or check this out or something like that, right? Like you might have had I got the impression you had a pretty loose agenda when we jumped on here and me as well. So I think we did a good job of talking about a lot of fun stuff. Everybody can find you at The Hard Sell. That's your podcast, The Hard
Mhm.
Sell podcast with Joel Stevenson as well. If they want to just follow what you're up to and see where your amazing life goes, you've clearly got a depth of knowledge that is amazing. They can go to LinkedIn and go to Joel Stevenson GM. So / Joel Stevenson GM. And it's been super fun talking. I'm going to hit stop and then we can say goodbye offline. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Table Rush Talk Show. For resources to help you sell your stuff, go to belove.media/resources. That's belove.media/resources. And be sure to subscribe, comment, 5-star, and share. Thank you again for listening.